Hello. Today's lecture is about online lecturing is not enough. Holistic engagement in learning requires quite a lot. As a basic rule, learning is not a spectator sport, but requires participation. Knowledge and insight is not something a student can passively absorb, but is something a student actively constructs. Effective learning is therefore more activity-based than material and presentation-based. There are many ICT tools, but pedagogy rules. In other words, to get learning, you need a pedagogical approach. E-learning. On campus, you have a lot for free. You have free learning environment. You have teachers, peers, group rooms, the cantina, the library. It is all on the walls. E-learning must deliberately compensate for lack of the ordinary learning environment. And that is what e-pedagogy is all about. Basically, we have three types of dissemination. We have the traditional one. Information dissemination, very teacher-centered. The teacher disseminates so-called objective truths to the recipients. And we can always say afterwards, it has been said, I did cover it. And if or when the recipient has not learned, that recipient is either stupid or lazy. Then you have the second type, more modern, the infotainer, the infotain teacher. The teacher makes curriculum interesting and entertaining. And if or when the recipient does not learn, it's the bad teacher. You can always blame the teacher if you don't learn. But both these versions are focused on the teacher. So maybe we can have a third one with the teacher more as a guide on the side. And then, if we venture into that, we have to make learning objectives and learning activities. Define learning outcomes. That's what the first you do. And then develop best possible learning activities to achieve those learning outcomes in cooperation with the recipients. Focus on the recipient's learning activities. You have to organize learning. And then you have to assess the achievements and how learning activities can improve. We know actually quite a lot on how to ensure quality in education. And of course, a rule number one is we need engaged teachers with broad and deep subject knowledge combined with pedagogical skills. Teachers need to be actively engaged in and passionate about teaching and learning. The teachers provide students with multiple opportunities and alternatives for developing learning strategies based on the surface and deep levels of understanding. It's actually an Australian professor called Hattie who has made quite a lot of research on what works and what doesn't work. Let's continue with Hattie. The second rule is we need clear, concrete and challenging learning goals set at an appropriate level. Students need to have a very accurate understanding of their achievement levels across the subjects. It is so much easier to learn if you know exactly what you want to learn. Let us say, if you try to ride a bike, you know exactly when you know how to ride it. Useful in this connection is the Bloom's taxonomy for critical and creative thinking. And Big's solo taxonomy. We'll come back to that in the next course. Number 3, We want a well-structured, rich and varied learning environment with emphasis on cooperative learning with plenty of feedback opportunities. According to Hattie, it is the feedback to the teacher about what students can and cannot do that is more powerful than feedback to the student. Crucial is the feedback to teachers on what is happening in the classroom, so they can ascertain how am I going in achieving the learning intentions. Factor number 4 is we need clear progress plans with time frames. The more students feel challenged and the greater the academic demand on students, the more students are engaged. Increasing allocated time without increasing productive time is unlikely to improve educational performance. A learning-centered more than teacher-centered approach usually works better. It is what the teacher gets the students to do in the class, rather than what the teacher specifically does. So the learner's construction of knowledge and ideas is critical. So often learners become passive recipients of teachers' lessons. But the aim is to make students active in the learning process. Students are trained to attribute success or failure to factors such as efforts rather than ability. This is crucial for motivation. If a student is a so-called performer, relying on his talents rather than a learner, she will tend to attribute success or failure to factors outside her control. A learner will tend to attribute success or failure to level of own effort. So the learner always says, okay, I can put in more effort and then I will learn more. The factor number 7 is a learning environment ensuring that errors are welcome. Traditionally, you were not supposed to do errors, then everybody would laugh at you. But errors are key levers for enhancing learning. So choose appropriately challenging learning intentions and success criteria, enabling the students to attain these goals by monitoring and evaluating the effectiveness, and creating a safe and cooperative climate to make and learn from errors, from each other, teacher, students and peers, and optimize feedback. So errors, in other words, are welcome. The 8th factor, appropriate use of technology. Computers are used effectively when there is a diversity of teaching strategies. There is a pre-training in the use of computers as a teaching and learning tool. When there are multiple opportunities for learning. And when the student, not the teacher, is in control of learning. Peer learning should be optimized, and feedback should always be optimized. The secret weapon, so to speak, in e-learning is make a structured and detailed study guide with clear objectives, timeframes, and learning activities. We need asynchronous communication with online threaded discussions and negotiation of meaning. In addition, we need a continuous, friendly interaction and feedback from peers, and tutors. And of course, we need specially trained tutors. As a rule, the teaching standards, rules of thumb, we think presentation, that's the tradition. This is what the students are supposed to read, listen to, etc. That's presentation information, literature, lecture, movie, etc. And then when you have presented this, then you have the learning activities. preferably varied. And these learning activities the teachers have decided before we start the presentation. Then, after learning activities, those learning processes should end up in a reification. There is something concrete as a result, a product of the learning process. And then finally, we have a reflection and a summary process. So then we can just continue in circles, in learning circles, so to speak. Learning outcomes, very tricky for most teachers. On course completion, the student should be able to, for example, identify the components, describe, and you can have several of these learning outcomes. The verb is crucial. Look up appropriate verbs according to learning outcome in Bloom's taxonomy. And of course, we teachers tend to forget the assessment. Oh, we have to make an exam or a test. How do we do that? Well, we have different types of assessment. So if we go according to the relative reference, we kind of rank each student's performance comparing it to the performance of others. Who learned better than who, or according to some rules we have made. I think it's probably better to use criteria referenced assessment. And that is what you use when you are using or making these learning or intended learning outcomes. Then you meet preset criteria, the ILOs, intended learning outcomes. We also have to differentiate between formative and summative. So formative assessment is procedural feedback on how to do better. That's the main kind of feedback that you are, as a teacher, are supposed to give. The summative is grading the work at the end. Here is a picture of learning environment. And here you have the students in the center, and then you have all these factors around. You have study guides, you have libraries, you have an LMS, professors, you have reification, the World Wide Web, face-to-face meetings, tutors. All these are part of the learning environment that you are supposed to build as a teacher. As you can see, it's quite complex. High-quality learning situation, the productive interaction. First of all, you have to ensure active engagement. Active engagement you can usually ensure by having frequent teamwork. That means you have regular interaction and feedback. You have to base your activities in realistic and motivating tasks. And you have to contextualize. It cannot be just for the classroom. And you have to make your learning activities dynamic and adapted for change. The pedagogy for change is called transformative pedagogy. Transformative pedagogy requires student engagement. It's more or less based on the ideas from Pablo Freire, with the dialogue learning rather than banking or deposits of knowledge into the brains of the students. Transformative pedagogy cannot be restrained to a classroom. It contextualizes problems in adjacent areas and with people in the learning areas. It demands active and engaged students who ask critical questions. And this again demands information literacy. All students are supposed to be able to search and critically assess information. On this picture you can see some people that are searching information and assessing it. Transformative pedagogy means that students must collaborate and they have to negotiate meaning. It's based on, more or less, the social constructivism based on Vygotsky and other pedagogues called Selye, Levin-Wenger, Biggs, etc. And this is a fairly common pedagogical approach. The success factors for online learning is the right choice of pedagogy according to the learning outcomes. You need a socio-cultural approach, which means collaboration mandatory. You also need to put in time frames. You cannot continue forever doing the same thing. You need cut-off dates for hand-ins. You need the active engagement. You need the multicultural collaboration and writing of group documents, yes, in addition to individual documents for grading and feedback. So here is a picture of such a group working together. It's very heterogeneous, and they can work offline, face-to-face as here, or online in virtual group rooms.